Hello, oodles and noodles. We are back for another video, although today will be a slightly bit different. A slightly bit different? I don't even know if that's a proper sentence. It's going to be a bit different today, people. I am in the process of finalizing book 4 of Superpowers. And before I finish it off and release a review, and then most probably do a full review of the entire series, I wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the differences I see. I suppose you could say culturally, but I guess it's just in terms of genre and medium, and how things are so different when you're comparing Japanese anime manga to many of the books that we see being made in more North American or just Western culture. And so I wanted to just discuss these quite large differences between a series such as Superpowers and My Hero Academia. So My Hero Academia, for those of you who do not know, if you do not know Deku, you should. Okay, I just want to preface this with just the fact that I love My Hero Academia. Okay, I don't want this to come off as a hate video, but I'm going to kind of shit on certain concepts. Now, for those of you who have watched past videos of mine talking about anime and the just the medium itself, I've talked out against how anime and manga utilize very young children to showcase quite serious issues. Now, in some cases, this can be done really, really well. The conceptualization of how they utilize these kids can make sense. So, for example, like in the series Hunter x Hunter, where our two main characters are two young boys, Gon and Killua, they're 12 years old. And obviously the things they're doing and certain of the ways they're acting don't really make much sense in relation to reality of how a normal 12-year-old would react. But when you look at the world, when you look at the setting, when you still see how these kids interact with others, the things they do, the way they do things in general, and what society expects from them, it makes sense what they're doing. Whereas in a series such as My Hero Academia, where you have a group of children going to a very prestigious school to learn how to be heroes, much like the series Superpowers, where we have a group of teens going to a school known as the HCP, the Hero Certification Program, at this university known as Lander, to learn to be heroes. Now, that's where the correlation pretty much stops, point blank, because there are some fundamental differences in how these series handle how kids would become heroes. The first and most obvious point is that My Hero Academia starts with a bunch of 15-year-olds. So these 15-year-olds are going to school to learn how to be heroes. Now, you could think to yourself, okay, that's fine. 15 years old, obviously they have abilities, they have powers. This makes sense, right? You want to start them as young as possible, learning to utilize these abilities in a responsible fashion, and then when they're adults, they would then go out and be heroes. That's not what happens. Whereas in Superpowers, most of the kids starting off are in university. They're 19 years old in general when they start off in the Hero Certification Program. That is a huge gap. Now, many people would think 19 years old is still extremely too young to be put into violent situations. You're only 19. Now, granted, in reality, in many places, you can join the military when you're 18 years old. So it still kind of makes sense in relation to reality. We do have an expectation that once you turn 18 years old in many places, you are considered an adult. You can be involved in whether it's drugs or going to war. Now, many people would argue against that point, but that just feeds more into the whole point of where I'm going to get at. So to start things off, just in general, to contrast and compare these two series, the age starting off that they believe culturally is acceptable to become an adult and do adult-like things, which, I mean, stopping crime and dealing with these kinds of issues is an adult thing. It is not something for a 15-year-old to do. It's just huge, that gap. A 19-year-old who's out of high school, who is in an adult environment, which a university is very much different than a high school environment. It is completely and utterly different. So to keep moving forward, I mean, honestly, I feel like I could just stop the video right there. In some ways, I could just cut it off right there. Like, they're 15 years old. This is just ridiculous. But obviously, again, we're dealing with fantasy series. This is not fully based in reality. So I give leeway. Okay, cool. They're 15 years old. But the next step, of course, is then, well, then how is this series going to progress? How are they going to take these very young kids, and 19 years old is still very young kids, and teach them step by step how to enter into what's supposed to be an extremely violent world, especially one where people have abilities where they can make things explode, where they can literally reduce people down to dust in an instant, where they have super strength and can rip limbs off. How is that being handled in both of these series? And of course, each of these are just placeholders for many different series, other anime series or other novels that handle people with abilities or just people in violent scenarios. Okay? My Hero Academia basically has our young students just kind of flippantly having to use their abilities over and over again until they learn to be better at them. Now, we do see in the series and possibly in the manga, which I have not read to be fair, we do see in My Hero Academia that the teachers are pushing these kids to utilize their abilities so that they can get stronger in them. But the ways in which they're taught to utilize their abilities are extremely one-sided. It's usually just find a super move and get stronger with it. There's not a huge amount of time spent teaching them martial arts, hand-to-hand, how to deal with combat situations, the psychology of combat situations. What do you do ethically in certain scenarios? How are you supposed to handle these things? How do you deal with civilians who are freaking out? There's nothing showcased on that end. It's very much just, oh, you don't know how to use your ability properly yet? Try harder. That's really most of what we see in My Hero Academia. You have some teachers who are shutting down some of the kids, basically saying, you don't know what you're doing. But the explanations that follow after are mostly moot. They're not really actually showing in the series how they can start to think about their abilities and how to cover up these weak points. It's done in tiny little bits and pieces, but it's not showcased well in any sense of the word. And that's just from a physical standpoint. Whereas if we shuttle over to something like Superpowers, the first year, so the first entire year of the series Superpowers, we have our university students, so 19-year-old kids, being put into ethics classes, being explained that at every step of the way, this is an extremely violent job you're going into. Most of you are not going to graduate because you're simply not going to be psychologically and physically capable of dealing with the violence and death that's out there, because you're going against people with superpowers and you can basically die extremely easily. You might have to make extremely difficult choices as you go along in regards to saving some people, not being able to save others. They're constantly pitting them in combat against one another. And there's so much care taken care of that, yes, there's a big chance you're going to be injured, but we're going to be here to make sure that we avoid that scenario as much as possible. We also have specialized healers here that can help you out. It's very, very carefully checked out, and most still, by the end of the first year, drop out or get kicked out because they cannot handle the simple fact that there is so much physical training placed on these kids. Literally, like, they're training like high-level athletes on a constant basis, because if you can't physically keep up, if you don't have the discipline to physically keep up, you don't deserve to be a hero. You are not ready for it. You cannot handle it. My Hero Academia, it's just kind of like, show me your power, it's cool. Okay, there's not this huge strain pushed off. We see a little bit showcasing at the beginning of My Hero Academia, where Deku is kind of being physically pushed in training by All Might so that he can better handle his ability that's going to be given to him. But that completely goes away mostly once you get into the first season, and especially in the later seasons. You don't really see them hardcore training much. There's little camps here and there, but the series pretty much interrupts that constantly with them being attacked. And that's another concept that is really, really badly handled in My Hero Academia, whereas in Superpowers is very well handled. The safety of the students in Superpowers is paramount to the teachers. They are constantly being held to those standards. Now, some people will go, whoa, whoa, whoa. When the students of Class 1A get attacked in My Hero Academia, there's a lot of media coverage on it, the school gets shit on, they are in trouble for that, yes, but their response to it is kind of ridiculous. They just put them in even more dangerous scenarios, and many times the teachers allow the kids to do things that are insane, that make no sense, and for the dumbest of reasons. For example, for those of you who have watched the series, there is a tournament, a festival, sort of like the Olympics, where these kids get to showcase off and do lots of competitions and contests, and they fight against each other. And there are almost no limitations. 15-year-old kids, they've been in school for like 2-3 months, 4 months, and they're fighting against each other full pin. Our main character, Deku, who has almost no control over his power. Every time he uses it, he breaks and shatters his entire bone structure when he does it. And he is allowed to compete. Should not even have been allowed. He is allowed, and in multiple instances, is watched by many, many professional heroes and teachers, and is just allowed to break his body continuously. And everyone's like, oh, well, we have to let him do that. No, he's 15 years old. He does not have the emotional capacity yet to understand what he's doing to himself. That is why we have adults. That is why we have teachers. And the fact that they are allowing a 15-year-old just showcases an immense damaged psychology. And it's even more in conflict with the fact that sometimes the teachers are there going, no, and giving him shit for having done things where it's like, why didn't you stop him? It's your job to stop the kid. It's your job to teach. There's no teaching happening in this entire show, practically. There's just suddenly adults getting really angry at the kids because the kids were forced to take really bad risks because the adults were incompetent. Not because the kids are bad. They're kids. It's not their fault. They're being thrust into scenarios they are not prepared for and then shit on by teachers and adults who themselves were irresponsible and couldn't handle the scenarios as well. Very terribly shown. Superpowers, on the other hand, again, in every step of the word, they basically are being managed to the umpteenth degree by their teachers. They are being pitted against their teachers. They are being pitted against other students. They are being constantly shown their faults, their errors, how they have to improve, whether it's physically, emotionally, intellectually, how they have to be more clever, how they have to think about the ethics of scenarios. All these different things and aspects get put into the book series. Students are not allowed to just literally go and beat the crap out of each other, almost to like you're breaking yourself constantly for a festival, for a competition. It's illogical, especially in their first year, which is the most important aspect of this entire complaint. They're in their first year in My Hero Academia and they're allowed to do these things. Why would you take a 15-year-old and put him into a competition right off the bat when he hasn't been in school for a full year yet? That makes no sense whatsoever. Maybe in his third year, maybe in his fourth year, not in his first year. What are you going to see? They're kids. They haven't even been taught for a long time yet. That's insane. But yet it's kind of normalized in the series, and I see that a lot with an anime where young kids are taken, not taught in any way, shape, or form, just kind of mismanaged by adults, or there's no adults whatsoever. This is showcased in a lot of anime. And then they're just allowed to like break themselves to death. And it's kind of like, yeah. again, I love this series. I love My Hero Academia. It's so fun. I love the characters. There's a lot of things going on, but it's just unacceptable if we're talking about it honestly. Another concept where we can say, again, the ethics of things, of whether it's responsibility, discipline, how someone is comporting themselves, especially as someone who's going to be a hero. In Superpowers, we have a character who has the ability to manipulate ice. He can control ice. He's just extremely strong at the beginning. And he ends up in a tiff with one of our main characters, Vince. And this character continues to harass Vince, to be aggressive with him, starts fights off campus. And at first it's kind of pushed aside and this and that. There's kind of excuses made, but this student eventually, extremely quickly, by one of his own partners in his team that he's fighting on, explains this to one of the teachers who hadn't been fully aware yet of what this kid had been doing. And as soon as it's found out, that kid is removed from the program. He's not allowed to be a hero. How could he? He's not acting in any way, shape, or form as a hero should. And this is a 19-year-old kid, okay? Still a kid, but compared to a 15-year-old, it's like being in another universe in terms of emotional depth and understanding and experience and control. And this kid is shunted out. Then we have someone like Bakugo, who many people love, and I think there's a lot enjoyable about Bakugo as a character in the series My Hero Academia, but Bakugo is violent, verbally, physically, is not in any way, shape, or form showcasing a proper decorum for a hero. And this would be fine. He's 15 years old. It's okay. But the teachers do nothing about it. They don't even give him shit. They don't say anything to him. He's never in trouble. When he attacks Deku in the series and starts a fight and forces Deku to defend himself, all because he's just upset that Deku is getting stronger, he's given cleanup duty as a punishment after. That's his punishment for attacking another student full pin, is cleaning garbage in his dorm. Does that make any sense to anyone? Where this young kid is going out and saving lives and fighting against criminals? No, that makes no sense. It just doesn't. It's not based in any way, shape, or form in a realistic sense of how adults would handle someone who can make explosions from their hands. That's Bakugo's ability, for those of you who don't know. So this kid who has an extremely violent, dangerous ability is allowed to just rage out constantly and is not in any way, shape, or form put into his place. And I don't even know what else to say on that point. The teachers in My Hero Academia are, quite frankly, the most incompetent teachers I've ever seen in my life. The teachers constantly, if we're going to talk of danger, practically they injure students to such a large degree. 15-year-old kids who've barely been training for a long period of time, and these teachers harm them. All Might himself, the most powerful character at that point in the My Hero Academia series, practically cripples Deku in combat training, just injuring him to a degree that's completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. It is not something that should be done to a 15-year-old, not at that time period yet. He's not prepared for it. They don't understand it. In Superpowers, injury happens to the students, of course. They are training to be heroes who will be going against criminals who will be attempting to kill them, cripple them, do whatever they want. But at every step of the way, these teachers are taking so many precautions to protect the students. And most of these things do not happen in their first year. Again, these kids are 19 years old, not 15, 19 years old. And most of this does not happen in year one. Barely happens in year two. It's only once they hit their third year that the teachers really start going full pin, where they're in much more dangerous scenarios. That means they're almost 21 or are 21 years old before teachers start aggressively really putting them in very violent, dangerous situations. Again, there are dangerous situations that happen in year 1, in year 2 of their training. But again, there's so much controlled mechanics, there's so much expectations, there's so many safeguards put in place. The teachers don't just see them violently injuring each other and then go, yeah, this is good. This is great. Like, they're pushing themselves, they have to motivate themselves. No, that is not the scenario that they're placed in. And so this is, I guess, the fundamental difference between how things are many times showcased in non-anime manga mediums are that kids are kids, and you have to treat them like kids, and you can't just have an expectation that they're ready to handle all these things. You don't put 16-year-olds with temporary hero passes into the outside world expecting them to fight violent criminals and make great decisions. Yes, they put them under other heroes, but they're still expected to fight. 16-year-olds shouldn't be fighting violent criminals. They're 16 years old. They're not ready for it. 19 years old is not even considered ready in the Superpowered series. To contrast and compare, by the second year in My Hero Academia, the kids are on the streets. They already did this in the first year anyway, but they're on the streets fighting criminals. It's considered acceptable. After 4 years in Superpowered, then and only then are you allowed to internship under a hero. You're not allowed to be on the streets until then. You're not a hero. You're not even a hero once you intern. You're temporarily on the streets learning. And that's for a couple of more years. So these kids only start interning with heroes when they're already 21, 22 years old and are adults and have gone through a full workload in university. They're doing all a normal university degree plus their hero certification. So they're learning how to be functional adults within the world, and on top of that, learning all the other things. So they're put under an enormous amount of pressure and stress. And of the, I believe, Superpowers begins with 50 students in the class, only 10 are allowed to graduate at the end because their rules and regulations are so strict, so stringent on who is allowed to finish off the year and graduate. Because you can be great, you can get to that final year, be really, really great, but if they don't feel that psychologically, emotionally, and intellectually you are prepared and ready to go onto the hero world, they don't allow you to be a hero. It doesn't matter how strong you are. It just doesn't matter because you're too much of a danger to the society. It's not allowed. My Hero Academia, you're 16 years old, it's fine so long as you're strong. If you're strong, it's cool. It doesn't matter that you don't control your ability properly. It doesn't matter that you damage things like crazy. It's cool. You're strong. That's all that matters. Oh God. It's not... How can I say this? This is not me attempting to shit on the whole series. Again, I love My Hero Academia. I've watched all 5 seasons. I can't wait for season 6 to come out. I love the characters. I love the action. I love everything about it. I love the series. But if we are going to be honest about it, how it showcases life, how it showcases training and teaching a young generation is so completely unacceptable to any logic that we could utilize that it's offensive, actually, how it's shown. You just basically have to shut off that part of your brain. You have to suspend just any rational part of your brain that thinks like, it's probably not a good idea. You probably shouldn't put a kid in that scenario. Really? You're just going to let that kid get away with that? With the abilities he has? You're not going to come down hard on him and tell him that this is wrong, that you can't talk like that, you can't act like that? That makes no sense. It just doesn't. Not in a world where people have these kinds of massively powerful abilities that can harm others in an instant. And so I think if we were to really, really look at these two series, we would have to argue that Superpowers is just a better version of how we would actually want heroes to be taught. Government controlled, watched over every step of the way, made sure that they're mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared for the horrors of going out into the world and committing violent acts against criminals who themselves are committing hugely violent acts. Massive amounts of training, physical, mental, emotional training that happens day after day, week after week, month after month. And if you can't cut it, you're kicked out for your own safety and for the safety of people who you are going to have to go out to the world and protect. Because we can't just have anyone going out with abilities and fighting on the streets. It's too dangerous. Just because you have a power doesn't mean you're ready to use it. And this is really just the I can't even express what I'm trying to say. It just seems that in many anime and the manga that might precede them, if they're coming from a manga, there's kind of just this desire to place young people. Maybe it's because it's exciting to have a young high school kid like developing abilities, and maybe they're trying to market to young kids out in society. But it actually showcases really negative things. Anyone who watches My Hero Academia as a youth is not going to be exactly learning good things from this series. Now, some people would say you're being too ridiculous, it's just a show, everybody knows it's a show, but a lot of youth actually learn from the things they watch. And if you don't think they're actually learning from what they watch, you don't understand human psychology. You know, I learned an immense amount when I was younger from books and from shows. Why? Because a properly shown philosophy given to me through a story was going to stick with me much more than just hearing about something that happened in real life, blah, 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 or reading a book about ethics. No, I learned a lot of my ethics and morality and logic from the things I watched and the things I read. This is why books have so much power. It's why shows have so much power. People love them for this reason, because it makes them feel something. And so, again, I love My Hero Academia, but I'm an adult. I'm an adult, and I understand how to separate myself from this stuff. Kids who are watching this, though, doesn't make any sense. This is why a lot of people do not like when anime showcases off women in really messed up ways, the interactions with them and men, in just these weird ways that much anime does, because people watch this, young boys watch this, and young boys, quite frankly, are very impressionable and very stupid. And they learn from this. And if you don't think it affects culture, trust me, it does. It does. I've been to Asia. I've been to Japan. I've spoken with many women from there, and trust me when I say that the culture you see reflected in whether it's anime or manga or pornography does reflect back on how men treat the women in public and in private. It very much does. Now you could say it's a vice versa. It's the reflection going into it's how the culture actually is, and then it's reflecting back into their shows and whatnot. But it's the same thing. It's going back and forth, back and forth. The youth are learning, and then it just goes in a loop. Okay, and again, Western culture has just as much bad things as Eastern culture in regards to this stuff as well. This is why some people complain. Now again, I think for adults, it's fine. We can have adult shows. We can have violence and sexuality and things happen between men and women that we understand are not acceptable in reality, and we can watch them and separate ourselves from them. Not that it doesn't affect us also, but we understand it. Kids don't most of the time. They learn from these things. This is why, again, look at music videos that showcase violence and sexual stuff against women, and you see that in the youth. You see that they try to take on that persona that they see in shows or in music videos or this or that, try and act all tough, and they treat women like shit. And again, violent stuff as well. And we want to have shows that actually make sense. We want kids to grow up seeing shows that make sense, that teachers are actually teaching properly, that they're treating kids like kids. 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds should not be in violent scenarios. You can make them be in school, like in My Hero Academia. You can make them even get into violent altercations where they had no choice. So for example, in the first season of My Hero Academia, they get attacked by criminals. That's completely fine because it's outside of their control. But the teachers don't teach shit after and then put them in equally or even worse dangerous scenarios where these kids get just violently hurt for no reason whatsoever. So the teachers in this normal system is just as bad. And the expectation again is that after like 2-3 years of before they even hit 20 years old, they're going to be on the streets and violently attacking people. That's messed. Superpowers, completely different situation. And I think it's a lot healthier. It showcases that there's a lot of gray. It showcases that you are going to have these kids have to be hurt, have to get into violent altercations. But it is still the adult's responsibility to take care of them, to watch over them, to train them, to teach them how to be responsible adults, especially responsible heroes, people with abilities. These people are supposed to be ideals. That's the whole point. A huge amount of superpowers. Okay, there's so much more to the stories of both of these series. I'm kind of glossing over because this is not a let's review their stories right now, but it's the deep foundational concepts of how they're teaching people to be heroes. Heroes are ideals, and you don't have a kid who's a kid violently, verbally, and physically abusing people around him as your ideal of what a hero is. Not unless he's being taught otherwise, which he's not. He's just not taught. Bakugo is in no way, shape, or form taught to be a better person. At any point in this show, he never is. Not even by Deku, who just kind of weirdly idealizes him as well and allows him to get away with so much. He's not put in his place by an adult, which he should. Whereas this is completely unacceptable in Superpowers. So if I were to compare these two series in terms of just logic, proper emotional depth, showcasing of how to improve as a person, leading towards an idealized hero, if we're going to showcase a school that's actually doing a school's job, teaching these kids to be better in every shape or form, Superpowers hands down beats My Hero Academia in an instant. Because My Hero Academia, quite frankly, you have to suspend disbelief constantly. You have to constantly ignore all the intense stupidity in the series. Now, is that okay? That's okay to a certain degree. But do we want that to be all anime? I think this is a lot of the reason why many people don't watch anime. It's because we have these idiocies that make no sense. Whereas other anime, the most famous anime, real famous, not like, oh, they're famous like Naruto or Bleach, which were famous just because they're shown an anime that loads of kids watch and people just continue to watch them to shut their brain off. I'm talking about the serious anime, the anime that push people to think that whether or not the main characters are children, teens, or adults, the scenarios make sense. The development of the character is phenomenal. We are just, I think, losing out on a lot of capacity to teach people better things through our mediums. And as someone who loves anime, it's been a huge frustration for me as I've gotten older. I was more accepting of it when I was younger because, quite frankly, I was an idiot when I was younger. I didn't understand. I didn't understand this stuff was feeding into me. And so I acted in certain ways and fantasized in certain ways that were, quite frankly, wrong and idiotic because of all these things I was taking in. Luckily, I also happened to be the kind of person who read a lot and took in other mediums, so I was able to kind of balance myself out, and as I got older, I realized how ridiculous some of this other stuff was. But yeah, this is an extremely long video. If you've actually managed to stay through till the end, kudos to you. This was quite ranty, but I just wanted to really talk about these huge differences in mediums and how we have to start thinking about this stuff a little bit more. And I really hope anime starts to showcase a better version of these kinds of mediums because they're so popular. I would love to see a My Hero Academia kind of show in the same vein that's like the kids are 18 years old, 19 years old. They're still kids. You can still enjoy it from a youthful perspective, but where the logic makes sense. Yes, they're still getting attacked by criminals. Yes, they're still getting into these really dangerous scenarios, but simultaneously they have really great schooling, really great teachers, heroes showcasing idealization and how to be a better person, more so than how it's showed nowadays. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Subscribe if you like. Check out geektales.ca. And again, kudos if you've actually watched through this entire video because it's extremely long. My apologies. Farewell.